My dad humiliated me in front of 200 guests at his retirement party. I smiled, said, "This is the last time you'll ever see me," and walked out. He had no idea his retirement was sitting in my name. The microphone squealed once before my father found his footing at the podium. 200 people in a banquet hall outside Bend, Oregon. White tablecloths, floral centerpieces, open bar. The kind of room where a man gets to feel like a king for one last night before the title officially changes hands. I was sitting at table 14, near the service door, next to a cart of used bread plates and a fire exit sign. That placement wasn't an accident. Nothing in my family ever was. My father, Gerald Ittner, adjusted the microphone like a man who had been waiting his entire life for this exact moment. He was 64, gray at the temples, a new Filson wool blazer he'd bought for the occasion. He looked important. He felt important. And in that room, among those people, his business partners, his golf buddies, his church friends, the people who had watched him build Ittner Building Supply from a 2-truck operation into a $12 million regional company, he was important. I watched him scan the room. I watched his eyes find me, and I watched him smile. "Most of you know my son Brett," he said, gesturing toward table 2, where my brother was already nodding and grinning, MBA polished and golden under the pendant lights. Applause. Real applause. "Brett's been running day-to-day operations for 2 years now. The company is in good hands." More applause. Then my father's eyes returned to me, and the smile shifted, just slightly, just enough. "And this," he said, "is my daughter, Helena." 200 heads turned. No degree, no real career. He paused for effect, paused long enough for people to lean in. Just freeloads off the family. The laugh started at table 2, Brett's laugh, then it rippled outward, the way these things do when people aren't sure if it's a joke, but they don't want to be the one who doesn't get it. 200 people laughed at me. I didn't flinch, didn't look down, didn't move a single muscle in my face. I reached for my champagne glass, stood up slowly, the way you stand when you're absolutely certain of something. I raised the glass toward the podium, and I smiled. Not a polite smile, not a wounded smile, but the kind of smile that comes from a place so deep and so quiet that it makes people uncomfortable. "Cheers, Dad," I said, loud enough for the tables nearest me to hear. "This is the last time any of you will see me." I set the glass down, picked up my clutch, and walked toward the exit. The room went dead silent. Not awkward, silent. Not the silence of a joke that didn't land. The silence of 200 people suddenly, viscerally uncertain about what they had just participated in. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Because while my father stood at that microphone calling me the family punchline, his entire retirement, every dollar of it, was sitting on a piece of lakefront property with my name on it. Not his. Mine. My name is Helena Ittner. I'm 34 years old. I've been a commercial real estate broker for a decade, working out of an office in Portland with a team of 6. I read property contracts the way most people read menus, automatically, instinctively, always looking for the line that's wrong. I am, by any reasonable measure, not a freeloader. But here's the thing about family narratives. Once the story gets set, it calcifies. And in the Ittner family, the story was set early. Gerald Ittner built his company on 2 things, Douglas fir lumber and the myth of his own self-sufficiency. He worked hard. I won't take that from him. But he also needed an audience, and audiences need contrast. Brett was the triumph. I was the cautionary tale. It didn't matter what I actually did with my life. The role had been assigned. I was 17 when I stopped trying to argue with it. Brett got the MBA support, the business introductions, the dinners where Gerald talked him through deals over single malt scotch. I got community college tuition paid for 2 semesters before Gerald decided I wasn't applying myself and cut it off. I finished my broker's license on my own, passed the Oregon State exam on my first try, signed my first commercial lease at 24. Nobody in my family came to any of those milestones. The only person who ever really saw me was my grandfather, Walter. Walter Ittner was 78 when I was born and had the bearing of a man who had watched enough seasons turn that nothing surprised him anymore. He'd spent 40 years building a timber operation in Deschutes County, not a corporation, not an empire, just a careful, methodical accumulation of good land and patient work. By the time I knew him, the timber operation was long sold, but he still owned 14 acres of Douglas fir along the eastern shore of a glacial lake in the Cascades. He walked that land every morning with a brass compass that had belonged to his own father. I was the only grandchild who ever asked to go with him. We'd walk the timberline before dawn, frost on the fir needles, loons calling across the flat black water. He'd stop at the same rock outcropping every time and take a compass bearing north, just to confirm it. I asked him once why he bothered. He knew that land better than his own living room. "The land knows who walked it," he said. "I'm just making sure it knows I still do." When I was 24, Walter drove to Portland. He didn't call ahead. He just showed up at the diner near my office and slid an envelope across the table with his coffee still steaming. Inside was a deed. Helena R. Ittner and Walter J. Ittner, joint tenants with right of survivorship, 14 acres, Deschutes County, recorded June 14th, 2016. "I already filed it," he said. "You don't need to do anything." I held the paper and felt a confusion I couldn't fully name. "Grandpa, why me? Why not Dad? Or, because your father would sell it before I was cold," he said. Not with bitterness, just with the precision of a man stating a compass bearing. "And because you're the one who walked it." I hugged him for a long time in that diner parking lot. I filed the deed in the back of my home office drawer and told myself it was sentimental. Walter was not a sentimental man. He passed in February February 2022, in the same farmhouse he'd lived in since 1971, quietly, in his sleep, the way people who have made peace with their lives tend to go. I cried for 3 days. I did not think about the deed. That was my first mistake. The party invitation arrived at my office on a Thursday morning in a cream-colored envelope with a return address I almost didn't open. Gerald Ittner's retirement, Beaumont Event Center, black tie optional, RSVP by the 12th. I set it on my desk and didn't touch it for 2 days. My assistant Priya noticed it on day 3. You going? Probably not. You should go. Priya, I know, but you should. Then Aunt Carol called. Carol is my father's younger sister, the only person in that family who has ever spoken to me like I was a complete human being. She's 71, sharp as a tack, and has zero tolerance for performance of any kind. Helena, she said, no preamble. Gerald's selling the lake property. My stomach tightened. When? Closing is set for the Friday after the party. Buyer's a developer out of Seattle, Sutton Pacific. Offer is $2.4 million. I sat very still. There's more, Carol said. Brett took out a $600,000 business loan 6 weeks ago. The lender holds the expected sale proceeds as informal collateral. Brett apparently told the bank the sale was family-controlled and guaranteed. I said nothing. Helena, do you still have that deed Walter gave you? My blood pressure dropped approximately 15 points. Yes, I said. Why? Carol was quiet for a moment. Because they're going to ask you to sign something at that party, or right after it. They're going to call it a family formality, and I need you to know what it actually is before you walk in that room. I told her I'd think about it. I RSVP the next morning. I told myself I was going to say goodbye to the lake. The week before the party, I started paying attention. I pulled the Deschutes County Assessor's records online. Public record takes 30 seconds. The lake property was still listed under Walter J. Ittner's estate. That was already wrong. Estates don't hold title after probate closes. I made a note, then I called Marcus Webb, a title officer I'd worked with on 3 commercial transactions, and asked him to run a preliminary title search. Just the chain of title, I said. Who owns what and when? He called me back in 40 minutes. Helena, this is interesting. Tell me. Current vesting in county records shows Walter J. Ittner and Helena R. Ittner as joint tenants with right of survivorship. Deed recorded June 14, 2016. No subsequent conveyances. Walter died in 2022, right? February 2022. Then, by operation of law, his interest in the property passed automatically to you at the moment of his death. No probate, no will required. That's how joint tenancy with right of survivorship works. It bypasses the estate entirely. He paused. Helena, you've been the sole owner of that property for over 2 years. Gerald doesn't have an interest to sell. The room was very quiet. Is there any chance, I asked carefully, that Gerald filed a subsequent deed? Something that transferred, no subsequent conveyances. I checked twice. I set the phone down. Gerald had been negotiating a $2.4 million sale on land he did not own. Brett had leveraged $600,000 in business debt against the expected proceeds of a sale that could not legally close. And the family paperwork they wanted me to sign at or after that party? A quitclaim deed. Sign here, Helena. Good girl. Don't ask questions. Hand us $2.4 million and go back to table 14. My hands weren't shaking yet. They were very still, actually. The way your hands get when your brain is working so fast that it's rerouted every available resource away from fine motor function. I sat at my kitchen table until 2 a.m. reading Oregon property law. Joint tenancy, right of survivorship, automatic vesting, undeniable, unambiguous, airtight. I'd been a real estate broker for 10 years. I'd read this doctrine 100 times. I just never thought it was going to apply to me. I called Frank Delaney the next morning at 7:45 a.m. Frank is a real property attorney in Portland, 22 years of practice, former title examiner for First American. He's about 5'6", always wears the same brown corduroy jacket, and has a gift for explaining land law to people who are in the middle of a crisis in a way that doesn't make the crisis worse. I'd referred 3 clients to him over the years. I'd never needed him for myself until now. I laid out everything: the deed, the joint tenancy, Walter's death, Gerald's pending sale, Brett's loan, the timing of the party invitation, Carol's call. Frank was quiet for almost a full minute. You're the sole owner, he said. I know. Gerald cannot legally convey title without your executed quitclaim deed. I know. And the developer's title insurance will catch this during closing. The deal will collapse the moment the title officer reads the vesting. Yes, I said. I know all of this, Frank. What I need to know is, can I be at that closing? Another pause. Helena, you are the title holder of record. You have every legal right to attend. In fact, the escrow officer will almost certainly require your presence once the title search flags the discrepancy. He paused again. How do you want to play this? I thought about my grandfather walking the timberline at dawn, taking his compass bearing, making sure the land knew he was still there. I want to be in that room, I said. I want the title officer to read the vesting out loud, in front of all of them. Frank had the certified copy of the deed in my hands by 3 p.m. Helena R. Ittner, joint tenants with right of survivorship, Deschutes County Recorder's Office, June 14, 2016. Stamped, indexed, returned to grantee. I held it for a long time. Then I picked up the brass compass from my desk. I'd taken it from Walter's farmhouse after the funeral, with his sister's blessing, and I put it in my jacket pocket. The night of the party, I drove to Bend alone. I sat through the cocktail hour. I ate the rubber chicken at table 14. I listened to the toasts to Gerald, the stories about the early days of the lumber yard, the sentimentality of men who had watched each other get old. I watched Brett work the room with the confidence of someone who already knows how the deal ends. At one point, maybe 40 minutes in, he drifted behind my chair on his way back from the bar, and I heard him say quietly to someone, not to me, over me, like I wasn't a person, "Closing's next Friday. We just need Helena to sign a few family documents. Paperwork formality." I set my fork down very carefully. Paperwork formality. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. My brother had borrowed $600,000 on the strength of my grandfather's land. Land that was mine. Land he had apparently never once considered checking the title on, because why would he? Helena didn't know anything about real estate. Helena didn't know anything about anything. That's the story. That's always been the story. Then came the microphone. Then came my father's voice. Then came the laughter. I'm not going to pretend it didn't land. It landed. Of course it landed. I'm human. And those were 200 people who had known me since I was a child, and they were all laughing. And my father was at the podium in his good blazer, and for exactly 1/2 second, I felt 12 years old again. Then the half second ended. I stood up. I raised my glass. I smiled. "Cheers, Dad. This is the last time any of you will see me." I set the glass down and walked out. I drove 3 hours back to Portland in near total silence with the defroster running and my hands perfectly steady on the wheel. By 11 p.m., I had sent Frank a text. "We're going to the closing." He responded in 4 minutes. "I'll have everything ready. See you Friday morning." Gerald called me twice that week. I let both calls go to voicemail. The first message, "Helena, we need you to come by and sign some paperwork before Friday. It's just a formality. Call me back." The second message, Wednesday afternoon, the tone noticeably tighter. "Helena, it's important you call me back today. The closing is Friday and there are some documents that need your signature. This is a family matter." Family matter. The same word he used when he wanted me to disappear quietly. When signing something was easier than asking questions. When being a good daughter meant not understanding what you were signing. I didn't call back. Brett texted Thursday evening, "Hey, Dad says you haven't responded. We just need your signature on some transfer paperwork before tomorrow. Can you come by tonight or early tomorrow? It's nothing complicated." I stared at that text for a long time. Then I put my phone face down on the desk and went to bed. Friday morning, Bend, Oregon, 9:45 a.m. The escrow office was a beige one-story building off Highway 97, the kind of place that has existed in every mid-sized Western city since the 1980s. Drop ceiling, silk ficus in the corner, a receptionist who smiles at everyone equally. The parking lot held Gerald's F-250, Brett's Audi, and a rental with Washington plates that I clocked as the developers. Frank and I arrived at 10:02. I was wearing a charcoal blazer. My hair was back. I had the compass in my left pocket and the certified deed copy in Frank's briefcase. We walked in. The conference room held a long table, a title officer at the head, and 3 parties who were not expecting a fourth. Gerald sat at the far end in a bolo tie, dressed for a victory lap, the way he'd been dressed all week in my imagination. Brett was to his left, leg bouncing under the table, a yellow legal pad in front of him covered in ballpoint pen notes. Across from them sat a man in a technical vest and horn-rimmed glasses who could only be the Sutton Pacific representative, late 40s, a pen already uncapped in his hand, a stack of executed documents in front of him. 3 heads turned when we walked in. Gerald's face went through 5 distinct emotions in approximately 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, relief, briefly, wrongly. Maybe he thought I'd come to sign. Then recognition of something wrong. Then a flash of something that might have been fear. "What are you doing here?" he said. "I was invited to a closing," I said. I took the chair directly across from him. Frank sat beside me and placed his briefcase on the table. It seemed appropriate, given that my name is apparently on some paperwork. Brett's pen had stopped moving. The title officer, Karen Whitfield, according to the nameplate in front of her, Deschutes County Certified Escrow Officer for 19 years, cleared her throat gently and opened her folder. She was a methodical woman, 50s, the kind who has seen every variety of real estate disaster and is no longer surprised by any of them. "Before we begin," she said, "I need to note for the record that our preliminary title commitment flagged an issue with vesting that requires clarification." She looked up. "I'll read directly from the commitment." The room was very quiet. "Title is vested in Helena R. Ittner as surviving joint tenant by operation of right of survivorship. Deed recorded June 14, 2016, Deschutes County Recorder's Office, document number 2016-0041-872. She looked up over her reading glasses. "Ms. Ittner is the sole title holder of record. There are no other vested interests in this property." She set the paper down. "Mr. Ittner," she said, looking at Gerald, "our search finds no subsequent conveyance of Ms. Ittner's interest. She has not transferred, quitclaimed, or otherwise relinquished her ownership. As of today, she is the only party with authority to execute a sale of this property." The developer, whose business card I would later learn read Derek Sutton, Principal, Sutton Pacific Development, LLC, very slowly turned in his chair and looked at my father. Mr. Ittner, his voice was careful, controlled, the voice of a man who has lost money in real estate before and knows exactly what this moment feels like. "You represented to us that you held clear and marketable title to this property." Gerald said nothing. His mouth opened, closed. He looked at Brett, who was looking at the legal pad in front of him as though there might be an answer written there that he'd missed. "You represented," Derek Sutton continued, the control slipping by approximately 5 95%, that this was a straightforward transfer, that there were no title encumbrances, that the property was yours to sell. It's a family, Gerald started. It's not a family matter, Karen Whitfield said, not unkindly, but with the firmness of someone who has spent 19 years preventing exactly this kind of situation from detonating in her conference room. It's a matter of recorded public title. The property belongs to Ms. Ittner. I had not looked away from my father since I sat down. He looked old, not older than I remembered, just suddenly, visibly old, in the way that happens to people when the story they've been telling about themselves stops being credible. The blazer looked different. The bolo tie looked different. The whole careful construction of the victorious retired patriarch looked like what it was, a costume. I thought about table 14, the bread cart, the fire exit sign. I thought about 200 people laughing. No degree, I said quietly. Gerald looked at me. No future. I kept my voice completely flat, not cruel, not triumphant, just precise, the way you'd read a contract. Freeloads off the family. I paused, but the deed only needed one name. From my jacket pocket, I took out the brass compass and set it on the table, on top of the unsigned quitclaim deed that Karen Whitfield had placed there for my signature. Then I picked the compass back up, buttoned my jacket, and stood. Frank was already on his feet. I walked to the door. Behind me, I heard Gerald's voice begin to rise, arguing with Karen Whitfield about the deed, about Walter's will, about family intentions, about what Grandpa would have wanted. His voice had the quality of a man trying to talk a wall into moving. Brett said nothing. I'll give him that. He at least had the self-awareness to understand that there was nothing to say. I walked out of that beige office into the cold Central Oregon air and stood in the parking lot for a moment, compass in hand, the morning sun coming in flat and bright off the high desert. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. I felt clean. The aftermath came in stages. Derek Sutton's attorney sent Gerald a demand letter within 48 hours, citing fraudulent misrepresentation of title and seeking recovery of $47,000 in development due diligence costs Sutton Pacific had incurred in advance of the closing. Frank forwarded me a copy without comment. Brett's $600,000 business loan went immediately into technical default. The lender, a regional commercial bank out of Eugene, had underwritten the loan on the informal expectation of the property sale proceeds. When the closing collapsed, the bank's risk officer flagged the discrepancy in Brett's loan application. An audit followed. Brett had, in the application, described the lake property as a family-held asset available for liquidation, without specifying that the title was not in Gerald's name. Whether that rises to the level of bank fraud is a question currently being reviewed by the lender's legal team. I didn't report anything. I didn't have to. The public record spoke for itself, and the people who needed to find it found it on their own. Aunt Carol called me the Monday after the closing. Your father drove to the farmhouse, she said. He was looking for Walter's original will. I think he was hoping there was something in it that superseded the deed. There isn't. I know. Walter's attorney explained that to him for about 45 minutes. She paused. Gerald didn't take it well. No, I said. I don't imagine he did. There was a long silence. He's not going to apologize, Carol said finally. I want you to know that going in. He's going to rewrite this in his head as something you did to him. I know. And Brett, Carol, I stopped her gently. I've spent 34 years waiting for those two to see me clearly. I'm done waiting. It's not a punishment. It's just done. She was quiet for a moment. Walter would be proud of you, she said. I didn't trust my voice for about 10 seconds. He planned it, I finally said. He knew exactly what he was doing with that deed. He knew the land law. He knew that joint tenancy bypasses the estate. He didn't tell me what to do with it because he trusted me to figure it out. He walked that land with you for 15 years, Carol said. He knew who it belonged to. It's been 8 months. I still have the 14 acres. I'm not selling it. Not to Sutton Pacific. Not to anyone. I drove out there in April, parked at the end of the gravel road, and walked the timberline alone for the first time. The Douglas firs were the same. The lake was flat and dark and cold, loons calling somewhere across the water, exactly as I remembered. I stopped at the rock outcropping where Walter always took his compass bearing. I took it myself. North is exactly where it's always been. The lake property is being evaluated for a conservation easement, a legal arrangement that would permanently protect the timber and shoreline from development while allowing continued private use. Frank's office is handling the paperwork. It's not glamorous. It won't make headlines, but it means that land will still be there in 50 years for someone else to walk in the early morning before the rest of the world wakes up. I think that's what Walter wanted all along. Gerald and I haven't spoken. I don't expect we will. There is no version of an apology that undoes a microphone and 200 people and 34 years of being someone's cautionary tale, and I'm not interested in waiting for one anymore. That's not bitterness, it's just an accurate reading of the terrain. Brett settled with the bank. I don't know the details. Priya asked me last month if I felt guilty about the closing, about walking in there, knowing what I knew, and letting it unfold. I thought about that for a while. They were going to ask me to sign my grandfather's land away, I said, at a party where my father had just called me worthless in front of everyone he knew. They were going to hand me a quitclaim deed and a pen and a smile and call it a family formality. Priya nodded slowly. So no, I said, I don't feel guilty.